Hello and welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma, and today I'm with Kyle Machulis. He is the creator and, of course, I guess I could say lead maintainer of Buttplug, which is a library written in Rust that helps you to interface with, I can't remember how many toys you have, but we'll let you introduce in a second. But with just basically a lot of toys in the sex, I don't know what the best way to say this, maybe I'll let you say it. I guess the sex toy or adult toy industry. And as I was saying before, I saw your library a long time ago and said, I would love to, get to know more about this. And then when we started doing podcasting, I said, oh man, I would love to actually interview you to talk about this. And I'm happy that you're really out there and you really want to talk about this because not that many people want to talk about it, as we talked about before the show. So maybe you can go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe give some more details. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Alan. So I'm Kyle Machulis. I am the CEO of Non-Polynomial, which is a engineering and consulting firm. We're based out of San Francisco. And well, I say we, it's pretty much just me. So for the past pulling up on 18 years now, I have worked in the sex tech industry in different capacities, consulting, engineering, program managing, all sorts of stuff. So these days at Non-Polynomial, what I do is mostly consulting for larger sex toy companies. Someone wants to put out a new product. They want to know what the market looks like, what's available already, what their new type of haptic actuation could possibly bring that other people aren't. And so I talk to them about that, as well as sort of developing my own research and design base that is Buttplug. So Buttplug is an open source project available at buttplug.io. That's our website. And it basically allows you to take a ton of different sex toys or intimate devices, or if we want to get really, really abstract, it's known as affective haptics, which is the field of haptics that also encompasses things like hug shirts and whatnot. So it's like you can hug someone from a distance. The stuff that I work with allows you to do a little bit more than hug. Anyways, so what our library does is takes some certain basically verbs that you would associate with this type of hardware, like vibrate or rotate or move back and forth or something like that, and abstracts them across hundreds of pieces of hardware, because all this hardware is proprietary. It all talks different ways. It might be USB, it might be Bluetooth, it might be serial. So we handle all of the boring stuff that you would have to do to talk to the operating system. And then we also handle all of the proprietary protocols that the toys run so that all of them basically look the same to developers and they can take them and do whatever they want. So that's kind of the super quick overview there.
Yeah, I'm so curious about why did you get started working in this part? Is it just that you saw because it was just everything was just so complicated that you kind of wanted to let other people experiment and kind of do what they wanted with their own toys, or kind of what actually got you started with Buttplug?
So when I started in sex tech, funny enough, that was about 2004, 2005. And at that time, this was before the maker movement. So there was no Arduino or anything yet. And what I was interested in the time was engineering education. Like, how do we get people from in that 18 to 35 demographic interested in electrical engineering, computer programming, all these things that if you weren't going to college for it at the time, you wouldn't normally do. And so kind of had this idea of what if we talked about the engineering of sex toys? And so I started a blog around that, which was called Slashdong, which at the time was a really funny takeoff on Slashdot. Now, not many people know what Slashdot is, so it just sounds really weird. So anyways, that was later reformed to a blog called Metafetish, which is still up these days at metafetish.com, but it's just for historical reasons now. And anyway, so I was posting tutorials on that blog where I would do teardowns and things like that. And then, of course, a couple years later, the maker movement comes through. We start seeing the Arduino. We start seeing the maker fairs pop up, things like that. And at that point, it didn't really behoove me to kind of continue this because there was already this gigantic industry that was going to be there that was a lot more accessible to all ages than what I was doing. So what I learned from that was that I saw this gap in the UI and UX of sex tech. This stuff was really hard to use. It was really hard to hook up. there weren't a lot of products out there yet, but even when there were products, they were so hard to use that people would buy them, try them once, get really mad at it, give up, or they would at least get it working, but didn't do what they wanted to. There was no software support. So I spent quite a few years just talking to people, talking to manufacturers, trying to figure out what people want, talking to users. And then around 2013 was the first version of Buttplug. But at that time, there just wasn't many toys available due to a patent. There was a patent in 1998 that we referred to as the 268 patent that basically was a patent on all sorts of remote sex toy control that really stifled the industry all the way up to 2018. That patent expired in August of 2018, at which point things really took off and you started seeing a lot more companies. But from that 97 to 2018 period, there were players here and there, especially if they could afford the licenses, but there wasn't a ton. So things have really taken off in this past 4 or 5 years. So 2017 rolls around, I start seeing the patents kind of ready to roll up. So I wanted to be ready for this sort of boom that was going to happen of brands and whatnot. And so that was when I started Buttplug as we know it today. And the idea there is just, as I said before, get the boring stuff out of the way for everyone. Most people don't want to play with how does the Bluetooth work? How does the USB work? How do I talk to a Lovin's toy? How do I talk to a WeVibe toy? And so we get all of that out of the way and people can program their game, program their app, just say, make it vibrate for any device that vibrates, and we handle the rest of it for them. And that goes back to this whole idea of, given the power to buy and control this kind of hardware, what would people do with it? And that's where the goal sort of ends for us and begins for everyone else. Is it's like, we get that boring stuff out of the way, and now what can everyone else do with it? And that's what we've kind of been discovering the past 4 or 5 years.
I'm kind of curious now, because you essentially been working on this for a while. Manufacturers have come over to you, especially since you know all the stuff, and saying, hey, we want to be more open. We see that this is a great kind of business decision, right? That, hey, we're open source, or you can use our APIs to control it. That they're saying, hey, we want to work with you. Can you help to maybe add this to Buttplug, or how would you recommend that we open up to outside people?
Certainly. So there is a company out of Norway called The Handy that I've worked with directly for protocol integration and whatnot, and that was great. There's more companies that are just of their own accord putting out their own APIs now, companies like Lalo and DLab. And really, there's not much pushback. We do some reverse engineering and whatnot to make sure that we can get the protocols when they aren't released. And some of that is just, this is not, the sex tech industry is not known for its engineering. For as much as everyone loves to talk about how porn leads the internet, that was more about bandwidth and video movement than it was about haptics. So that doesn't quite apply here as it would elsewhere. And that's, so with that issue, we kind of have to fill in on some of those engineering things, which is why we're doing the open source stuff. But companies are certainly adding APIs and allowing more access. Lovin's, for instance, has a way for people to access their app locally through a WebSocket or just pure HTTP requests even, in order to control their toys. So this is becoming more open than it used to be, where it was like they would actually put codes on a chip in the toy that had to phone home and match with other codes before anything would talk. It's way better than it used to be. We've still got a ways to go.
And I really want to make it clear, like, exactly what you guys do, right? So we were talking about before the show that there's a huge tech on kind of some sex toy where you can remotely control for your partner's experience. And I think, like I said before, what I thought you were trying to solve, but it's not it at all, right? You guys are, I think you said a slice of a slice of a slice. So it's really just, how can I interface to these toys? I think you said, does it have this ability? And can I use this ability? And if I use it, maybe you can talk more about that to make it very clear for the audience.
Yeah, that's completely correct. So what this library is about is really just the hardware layer. Like, how do we get the toy talking to some sort of host, be it a computer, possibly a cell phone in certain ways, or some other sort of processor that is not the device itself. Now, everything that's built on top of that is sort of part of an ecosystem where when I talk to people and they're not super familiar with setups of intimate hardware like this, they'll kind of consider that it's like the toy itself and all of the services in the middle all come as one package, which isn't really the truth. So we've got to make the toy talk to a computer, make the computers talk to each other somehow. And that's what creates a remote, intimate experience. And obviously, there are security issues at every level of that. One of my favorite demonstrations of that, there was a hacker, Smay, that did a DEF CON presentation a few years ago on Lovents that works from the Nordic firmware level all the way up through holes in Electron. It is a beautiful exploit chain. And it really serves to kind of document how complex and interconnected these systems are and how you have to think about this at every level. So for what I specifically do with Buttplug, that really just stays at that hardware access level. And once again, this is where Rust comes in and stuff too. We certainly want that to be secure. We don't want to have to worry about thread races, double freeze, things like that. But there's also secure stuff that will need to be built on top of that for, say, people to securely remotely control each other's toys or something. And that's not specifically what we do in this part of this library. We are just going, okay, you can access the hardware through us. But I even have some warnings in our developer documents that say, you could fly our protocol over a network. I don't know if I would recommend it, though, because that's not where we plan on the security being built in.
So actually, I'm kind of curious about how Rust actually came onto your radar. Was it that you're already like working in this industry and you're like, well, actually, this is all good stuff? Like, I'm guessing you must have a C or C++ background before you started with Rust, right?
I'm ex-Mozilla.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I was sitting next to Nico the day he started. So yeah, my background is in C and C++. I started at Microsoft in the late 90s, went on to work in educational and space robotics in the early 2000s, spent the mid 2000s in virtual worlds, mostly at Linden Lab working on Second Life. Then went to work on self-driving cars, so kind of back to the robotics land. And then finally, when that finished up, I ended up at Mozilla in 2011 as one of the first engineers on the Boot to Gecko or Firefox OS project. So at the time, Mozilla was hiring for embedded work for trying to get Firefox up on a phone. And I was part of that project. And that started out as part of the same sort of research department that Rust came out of. So my first day at Mozilla was Nico's first day too. And this was like Rust 0.0.0.1, like way back then. But so I was exposed to Rust through the beginnings of the language itself as well as the Servo project. During my time at Mozilla, I worked with it some. I didn't really get involved with it until about 2015, 2016, when we were starting to look more at the 1.0 release and integrating Rust into Firefox. So I was doing work with trying to integrate hardware into Firefox. I was the device interfaces lead on the browser for a while and was looking at, okay, how can we access, when we need to access things like USB for the browser, for things like the web authentication and things like that. Can we do that through Rust? Can we use that as a vector? As well as other teams that were looking at things like Stylus or Stylo and the other sort of major Rust chunks that came in from Servo. So yeah, I kind of started where it was, and that really gave me the view into it that I needed because I'd come from the C and C++ worlds, and honestly, I wasn't real happy with them. And once I finally got Rust and bounced off of it like 4 or 5 times because I'd had a good 16, 17 years of C++ under my belt. And so figuring out that whole borrow checker and lifetimes thing took a while. But once I got it, I kind of never could go back. I mean, it hurt to write C++ and Gecko while I was there. So yeah, and now these days I pretty much purely write Rust. It's just, it really fits in with how my brain works. And when I go to other languages, like I've now got some sort of like small borrow checker in my head still running those and thinking about like all the lifetimes and ownerships and everything else. So it's kind of affected everything I've done. And so with Rust specifically in this project, Buttplug actually started when it was in 2017. It started in C#. I tried a version of Buttplug in Rust in 2016, but there was going to be too much bring up I was going to have to write all the hardware libraries. Tokyo was still in 0.1, and it was somewhat like, since it was still a lot of the combinatoric usage of building up your tasks and whatnot, it was not the easiest thing to use. So gave that a shot, kind of dumped off of it pretty quick. And the other issue there was we didn't even have Bluetooth LE in Windows until 2017. That didn't come around until April 2017. So that was, funny enough, the month that I started this project in C#, because it was easy to access UWP then, which is the Windows framework that's under. So I started in C#. A few months later, made a JavaScript version that would run under browsers. Unfortunately, mostly while I was at Mozilla, that was working with mostly Chrome because it required Web Bluetooth and Web USB. So we had two side-by-side versions running for a while. And that was not fun to develop because it was like, okay, upgrade something in C#, rewrite it in JavaScript. Upgrade something in JavaScript, rewrite it in C#. I got sick of doing that. And so finally, into 2019 rolls around and we start looking at the Rust 136 update, where we're finally going to get async, await, pinning, and all that stuff. And I was like, maybe it's time to revisit this. And the great thing about that, too, is there'd also been multiple years of development in the ecosystem and in the libraries. So Crates was huge by that time, and it had multiple half-implemented Bluetooth libraries in it, but that's what I needed. I just needed to make sure that I had an implementation on all the platforms, and between the Web Bluetooth and Servo, as well as another open source library that was called Rumble, I managed to pull together all the Bluetooth I needed and start implementing this. In December of 2020, we finally released the first version of Rust Buttplug, which replaced the C#, replaced the JavaScript, and is now the main version. We still have a C# and JavaScript version, but they're built on top of that Rust now through native FFI bindings, or in the case of JavaScript, compiling directly to WASM. So really taking account the flexibility of the platform and the platform capabilities of the Rust ecosystem to allow people in other languages to still use this.
I mean, with Rust, and I guess that must have also opened up more platforms for you, right? Or you guys really only support, I'm guessing, Rust and C# and JavaScript out of the box, right? And then anything else you can do, but not really officially supported by Buttplug community?
So it depends on where you want your support barriers, or supporters, I mean. So going to our native FFI, the FFI is just a few exposed C calls through which we chuck protocol buffers, because at the time, it was just easiest to treat it like I would an IPC or something like that, except for the fact that you can just glue the libraries together through FFI. So, yeah, we allow, or we talk through those CDECL calls, and that allows it. We can talk to any language that way. There's still some stuff we need to, like some sugar we need to build on the top of that to make it usable by developers. So we still have some code for our C# library, for our JavaScript library, that needs to be written just to make the API accessible from the language that people want to use it in. So we have C#, JavaScript, and Java, actually. We have Java bindings to the system. Those were built specifically for Minecraft. And we're hoping to have them used in Android soon. But yeah, so the thing with the library is it comes batteries included with a bunch of different ways to access it. So, and there's a client server architecture. All of this stuff can be read about in the Buttplug Developers Guide. If you just Google Buttplug Developers Guide, it'll probably bring it up. The URL is kind of long. But we have all of our architecture documents in there. And so there are other language bindings that can use IPC or network to get to our server, which is what actually talks to the hardware. And so there's bindings there in Python, in Haskell, in Go. I believe someone's working on Lua. So it's kind of the sky's the limit there. And we're trying to support as many things as we can, because the whole idea of this library is if you want to code Rust in it, great, but that shouldn't be your limiter. You should be able to create in whatever language you want. We're just doing this core important to us part in Rust because that's where we need the safety to guarantee that everyone else can go make their whatever they want on top of this, and us to feel safe saying, yeah, you can use our stuff while you do it.
Now, I'm kind of curious, right? Because switching to Rust, I mean, still now, it's still a little bit of a gamble, but of course not what it was when you actually did the switch. How was the community? Were they actually supportive? Was there even no community at the time, or has this actually brought more people coming to your library because you guys are using Rust?
The community around the library is more based on the apps that are available. So being able to build the apps, build the games, whatever else they're going to use it for, than it is the core library. The thing about the core library is, first off, it's a product of my company, Non-Polynomial. So there's all the copyright concerns and things about that. We don't really have a lot of contributors. But the other thing is, too, this part of the library, the part that like Non-Polynomial maintains, given the context of the hardware that we work with, we really have to vet people when they're going to throw code in there, because this works with very intimate parts of people's bodies. And so there's a lot of trust being put in this code. And people may not realize that either. People like the users that don't have any development or experience may not quite get the amount of trust that they're having to put in this full technology stack, from the toy to the hardware drivers on the OS to our software to the app. And so we want to make sure that the hardware access is as trustable as possible. And when I was starting to feel like I was getting tired and burnt out putting together multiple versions of this and having bugs in the C# that weren't the JavaScript and vice versa, it was like, if I can just find a safe language to put all this stuff in and make it retargetable to other languages, to other platforms and OSs and whatnot, that's actually a maximization of my trust in myself and my trust in the code that I'm putting out. Because then I can mostly know that, yes, bugs are going to pop up between like someone trying to use Blues on Linux and someone using UWP on Windows to access Bluetooth. But I can at least know then that it's like there's still one code base where I can kind of fix all of that stuff. In terms of the accessibility, though, since the FFI has been a priority, and we've made sure that people that want to code in C# can still code in C#. People that want to code in JavaScript can still code in JavaScript. There hasn't been that much backlash from the community on the change. There's certainly like debugging for some of the app developers can be an issue if things die in the native layer, but we haven't heard a lot of that. And I mean, one of the other major issues we're finding out right now is that we're a little early to WebAssembly. It's super cool. It works fantastic when we can get it to work, but it's that when part of like, okay, well, what version of Webpack do you need to use? And what browser are you using? And what loading method are you using? And so on and so forth. And then like just yesterday, I got people that are like, yeah, so we were trying to load the WASM module into React Native to use it on a phone. And it's like, oh, that's going to be a new challenge. So there's pluses and minuses to all of it. But in the end, mostly what I was worried about, once again, was that my trust in my own code base of, if I can just concentrate on one code base and then distribute it everywhere, that's easier on me as the lead developer than it is trying to placate everyone else with 14 different implementations and 14 different platforms.
I am kind of curious because you did, of course, everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense. We need to vet these contributors, right? Has there been a time where somebody contributed something that you think was maybe useful, but you looked at the quality or looked at the implementation and said, we need to fix this, right? Has there been something like that?
Oh, absolutely. The open source philosophy behind Buttplug varies greatly from your normal run-of-the-mill, just up on GitHub project. Like the contributed portion of our document actually says, we're not looking for patches. Because I have a lot of people that show up that are like, yeah, I want to learn Rust. And this seems like a great way to do it. I was like, okay, so you want to walk in and learn the language on a piece of software that is going to control something that goes possibly inside someone's body. Have you thought this all the way through? And it's fine if people don't, because not a lot of libraries do this. We are a very special project, and that takes some special thinking and thinking about the physical interfaces and the fact that this does, in the end, it is meant to affect people physically, takes some getting used to for some people, and that's fine. But yeah, I've definitely kicked back patches and just gone like, I don't know if we can do that, or I'm not sure if we can put this together. And really the only way that I kind of accept patches is through a very interactive process, where it's like, you need to set down your design and kind of think through, does this fit with the rest of the library? So that's really why we look more for contributions on top of the library instead of contributions inside the library. And what that means that one of the other design philosophies that I have to take up with the library itself is if I don't want stuff in the library, we've got tons of people that are building their own hardware that's going to do God knows what. And I don't really want to add something special to my core library for this one person building their one thing. So I have to start thinking about, well, what APIs do I need to expose? What code paths do I need to expose so people could build their own thing and add it, but I don't have to commit it to my repo.
Now I'm kind of curious, like, are you pushing these kind of people towards certain kinds of protocols that you think maybe fit better with their project, and then that would be an easier way to get their maybe homebrew projects on board?
Certainly. So that actually happens a lot. People are like, yeah, I'm building this thing and I wanted to talk to Buttplug. I'm like, you're at the wrong layer. Because the idea for us is that we live between the application layer and the operating system, not between the operating system and the toy itself. Buttplug makes a horrible firmware. Right now, it serializes to JSON. You don't want to fly JSON to your little like microprocessor or something. That's way too much stuff to do. I mean, at least use like CBOR or something like that. But even then, it's like, how much data do you really need? Like, that's the problem. Like with Buttplug, we have to send over all sorts of information about like this toy has this capability and like can do it at this speed and whatever. When it's just your toy, you just get to say this is one thing and it does one thing, and I can just case that up here. And as long as we can identify that your toy is your toy and it does that one thing, that can easily be added to our configuration files, which are all external to the library. They're all just JSON files we load, and you can go at it. So when people come to me with that, there's other protocols that are made really well for that. For instance, there's a community-made protocol called T-Code. Think of it like G-Code, except for intimate haptics. Basically, it's G-Code for sex toys. So it has a lot of the same capabilities that Buttplug exposes. So it can make, like, it has commands to make things vibrate, rotate, move, heat up, things like that. But it's done in a very compact form that's much nicer to throw on an Arduino, an ESP32, something like that. So we'll direct people to that. And the nice thing is Buttplug supports T-Code. So they just build their T-Code thing, and then they come to my library, and we just add a little, I can just show them how to add a little configuration block in some JSON, and there's no changes needed to my code. So yeah, one of the biggest challenges with this library is like communicating where app people need to be, where machine developers need to be, and how it interacts with this sort of ecosystem.
I'm kind of curious. So, is there any kinds of protocols that of course, your library supports, but then it's like you only support it because it's used a lot, and maybe you think that this kind of protocol is not very good, maybe not very secure? Because it sounds like you said T-Code is really a good one.
Well, so the protocols that we develop for the library are normally for commercial brands. So when I'm talking about protocol there, like we'll have a protocol for Lovense toys. We'll have a protocol for WeVibe toys, for Kiru toys. There's tens of these protocols in the library. And we have to add those because those are commercial consumer hardware that people can just go and buy from websites or whatever else. And they're going to want to use that with our library. So we have to add that in. For DIY stuff, people could emulate those, but it's like, why? When there's much better. That's why I try to point them at T-Code and standardize there. The interesting part is, though, in haptics, a lot of people are trying to come up with standards right now for how we communicate haptic data between devices and applications. That's a really hard problem because how do you discuss arbitrary touch with arbitrary applications? And the answer to that for the past few decades has been reduce everything to vibrotactile. So everything's vibrators. That's why we have rumbles in gamepads and chair vibrators and everything else. It's like, oh, that one's easy. You just set a speed, and the technology there is growing too. If you look at things like VR controllers, like the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, those are now using what we call, instead of spinning motors, they'll use, oh my God, I've forgotten the acronym. But basically, they can use very small surface mount vibrotactile systems that you can basically play audio files through them. And so you get this, what we call HD rumble through them. So there's still, even with vibration, there is still the ability to innovate, to evolve the feeling, but it's still vibration. And there's so much more to touch than that. There's thermoreception. So there's going to be like, can you make something hot or cold? There's friction and rubbing. And we tend to see these kind of things a lot more in the realm of sex toys than you do in video games. Because with video games, it's just like, okay, throw rumble in the controller. As long as the player knows something is happening and we can make the controller rumble, great. With sex toys, you've got a wealth of different actuation methods, and that's kind of what we have to think through. So we also kind of have to think beyond those protocols too. Like there's going to be companies that only make vibrators, and if someone wants to make their own vibrator, then great, they could possibly use that. If they want to do something else with it, then they're going to need something else. And that's when we start looking at these other protocols like T-code.
Okay. Yeah. I tried looking up T-code on Google just now and I didn't quite see it. So maybe I'll have to take a look at it.
Oh, yeah. So I can send you a link later. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds quite interesting stuff, though. Yeah. I did see that decode is like a way that the data is actually very, very compact, right? Like you said, made for Arduino, this kind of stuff. So it sounds interesting. But T-code is kind of like implementation of decode that's more specified in the sex toy industry. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's not even specified in the sex toy industry. T-code comes from a DIY project called the OSR2. So the OSR2 is a multi-axis stroker. The OSR2 allows you to mount what we call an ONA hole, which I guess would normally be known by a brand name here as Fleshlight. So a silicone tube, this multi-armed mechanism that can move at multiple axes. So of course it can move like up and down, but due to the servo setup, it can also kind of rotate and sometimes move laterally. There's actually a 6 degree of freedom version that's about to come out. And within that too, it's a completely 3D printable DIY platform. And it's available on Patreon, actually. It's completely also community supported. The developer that runs it has a Discord server with like 1,000 people on it now. It's just all these people like 3D printing it and then building their own stuff on top of it. So much like Buttplug does this for software, the OSR2 and now the SR6 do this for hardware, at least for certain body parts and body types. So T-code came up with OSR2 because OSR2 had multiple servos that it needed to work in harmony to get movements correct. So like people have built like full on like Bezier curve creation simulators for figuring out the kinematics of the toy and whatnot. The amount of engineering in this is really wild. So T-code is extensible. So you can actually say like, okay, I have this many linear servos, this many rotation servos, and it kind of allows you to craft the machine you have. And because people have also built, once again, warmers for it. People have built lubrication injection for it. Like it's just, the sky's the limit, and a fully built out like OSR2. It's an amazing thing to see. I have mine behind me somewhere, but unfortunately it would take me a minute to find it. But I can send you videos or something like that so you can post it. It's a neat thing. I've done a YouTube video on it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever you want to send to us, I think just double check, make sure it's okay with everybody if I
it's
put
on
them
YouTube.
on there. But
yeah,
okay.
All of this stuff is on YouTube. So it's all as not safe for work as YouTube will allow, but that's still fairly safe for work.
Okay. Then I think it should be fine. Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, is there a bunch of toys, like you said, the sky's the limit in terms of what toys can be created, but is there specific toys that Buttplug is actually made for to support? Or is it easier to say what it doesn't support? Like, is there like a hard thing you're saying, we're not going to be working on these kinds of toys? It seems more like it's more on the protocol or manufacturer level, that kind of saying yes or no.
It's really on the way that we speak about the capabilities of the library and the protocols and the type of actuation that they can do. And what we try to draw the line at is a combination of popularity of a certain type of actuation versus basically for, I don't want to say liability, but danger, basically, or like how safe is something to use. Like you can hurt yourself with any toy if you try hard enough, but something like a vibrator or a stroker is not going to be as bad as like a thrusting machine or something like that. Or then there are systems to use electrical signals to do direct nerve stimulation. If you've ever thought about like a TENS unit or something like that, like if you have a muscle spasm or something, you can like put the pads on and it will cause the muscle to relax. there are those systems for sexual usage. Now, the problem there is you are at that point actually pumping electricity directly through nerves. And there's a lot to think about there on both the hardware side and the software control side. And trying to do that in a way that is safe yet generic is very hard to do, especially not knowing what body this is ever going to be connected to or something like that. So there are places where we draw the line and kind of say, yeah, this is not something we feel safe implementing. But all of the architectures are out there. All the information is out there. This is open source. And that's kind of why it's like, if people do have more experience in that stuff than I do, which is another issue where it's just like, I don't quite know how this stuff works. And I don't really want to write code for a system that interfaces with a body that I don't know every single bit of. But there may be people out there that do, and they can at least take our ideas, take the things that we've done so far, look at them, and if they want to implement their own thing, we certainly can't stop them. It's just, what am I sort of familiar with and what am I comfortable with? And that's kind of where that line is drawn.
Sorry, I have to ask because I think everybody is a little bit childish. I'm kind of curious, like, if there is this type of toy that maybe you're interested to support or the type of category, do you actually do some kind of research, which would probably include contacting the manufacturer and asking for information, and maybe even asking people, hey, does anybody own this thing? How do you use it? Or like, have you had any issues? Or I'm just kind of curious about that kind of stuff. Like you said, if you don't know, it's like, how can you support it? What kind of things would you want to do with it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a user base that are like, if people show up on our servers, they've already made that first step to wanting to talk about this, to wanting to be socially active about sex technology. And there is going to be a sort of vocal minority that'll be happy to talk about this. Now, not everyone is going to want to do that, and we certainly don't expect them to, because like, this library and the software deals with a very private subject, and we are happy to let people keep that private. That's, once again, part of why this library exists, why it's open source. Like, people can come in, trust, verify, take it away, and we might never know they're using it, and I am fine with that. But for those that are, we certainly talk to them about, like, well, we'll have users just pop up of like, I have toy X, it works with application Y really well, or it doesn't, or whatever else. And really what I try to do there is foster other people getting that information out, because I, as the developer of this library, am going to have not only am I the developer of this library, I'm stuck in this body and I've only got one of them. I can't really tell people how their bodies are going to work with these things. So while I certainly might have opinions about hardware and whatnot, I really only have a certain set of body parts I can experience that through. And that's not going to be a universal. So while I will certainly source information from the community sources information from each other too, based on possible matching body types, matching interests, things like that. Because I certainly can't be 100% of that. So yeah, we get information about also on the technical side of what toys work, what toys don't. That's one of the interesting things right now. There's a brand that we work with that the library works with, Satisfyer. They are all about making cheaper toys, but their toys are very difficult to connect to sometimes, depending on what platform you're coming at it from. So we have to talk to our users a lot about that. And the nice thing is, when we have to step back and just deal with the technical side, it's usually a lot easier. Like, people really want this stuff to work for them. And so they will kind of come out, and even if they're a little shy or something, it's not like we're asking them exactly how they're using it. All the information that I want, or that people running support on my server want, is what operating system are you on? What version of the software are you on? What toy do you have? Do you happen to know the model of it, so we might know what like version batch it came out of or something? And that's it. But other than that, once again, where I try to draw the line is like, the technical is great. Once it gets into the social or the community interest, where there might be a certain group interest, a certain fetish, something like that, we try to keep that off of our servers, because that is not what we are socially about. Those people, and the way that I normally work with interest communities or fetish communities or something like that, is I'll find a liaison or two that's a developer that wants to use our library with their interests, and I can give them hardware support, but I let them drive the rest of it. Because if I, working in once again, an intimate context like this, if you don't have the same interest as the users, you're going to put out a bad product. It's really difficult to sit there and try to abstract out of their minds this interest that they have if it's not shared. So the best way that I've found to handle that is to let the people that have the technical skills and are also interested in that drive that for their own communities. I'll help them where I can, and then I'll get the hell out of the way.
I can't help but think about like when they actually are designing these products in a room, how that discussion would be. So yeah, you're right. If you're not in that area, if you're not interested in that, it's really hard to make something that would satisfy that type of audience.
Yeah, that's also why, once again, well, this whole thing of letting people build for themselves, when you are a manufacturer of this hardware trying to build for people, like there are certain brands that cater to certain segments of the hardware buying population for this, but overall it's really hard to just build for everyone. Like, and you can build the toy, and as long as it vibrates and goes in the right place, great. But then like the apps that a developer is going to, like a developer for a manufacturer is going to put out, are going to be very generic, because it's just like, okay, this has to support literally anyone that's going to buy this, so it needs to be the sort of like least offensive thing possible to anyone. And that's why people come to projects like mine, where it's like, okay, we want it to be offensive in our own way or something like that. But or they really just want to take it and make it their own, their personal thing. And that's great. But the manufacturer might not know how to support that. So that's what we try to do.
Now, I think I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the uses. Has there ever been any really, I think we talked a bit before, and I think you said you're okay with this topic, right? Is there anything that's really like out there where you're like, okay, I never would have imagined that somebody would use this Buttplug library for this specific task?
Let's see. So,
I mean, obviously beyond fetishes, I think that's quite clear, right? Like you said,
oh yeah,
those can be far and out there and everything else.
yeah.
Like maybe, for instance, I'm thinking like maybe you could say use the motor in a vibrator to do X or something. I don't know what kind of thoughts are coming to your mind.
Oh yeah. Well, so in terms of stuff that for instance, there's an application that I put out called the Game Haptics Router. And what this does is it's basically a universal game mod of sorts. So you run it on a PC running Windows, and as long as the game doesn't have anti-cheat and supports Xbox game controllers, there's a certain library that the operating system uses that I can hook and watch for rumble commands going from a game to that library and then reroute them to toys. And the whole idea there is you can basically take any game you play that, once again, like things like Overwatch and things like that that have like pretty heavy network anti-cheat, we don't work with because I don't want to get sued. But other games, though, like just hundreds of games you can get on Steam or Itch or whatever else, it'll work with those. And so you can be playing the game and it will actually cause the sex toy to rumble whenever the controller rumbles. This past week, I actually did a project with this using Elden Ring, which is the newest From Software game that everyone's playing right now. A lot of times this just turns silly. Like it's just kind of fun to show it off, kind of like a shit post or something. But that's turned really interesting because cam models use it. So models that would normally just be on cam and their customers will be like through text chat. It's now kind of recontextualized that where a model can play games with their customers. And there's a little bit more interactivity to it than the just sort of single direction exhibitionism of cam rooms. So that turned out really neat. I've used it myself too on other like more effective haptics. Like for VR chat, I've used the library to build head pat haptics, which is kind of funny. Like one of the more intimate gestures, not really sexual, but possibly even just platonic, is patting people's heads in VR chat and in VR social worlds in general. So we've actually built a rig for VR headsets that just has a whole bunch of little like vibration motors that go on one of the head straps, and those can trigger when someone else pats your head in VR. And that was sort of a wholesome usage of it.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Sorry. Maybe want to segment about that too, right? Because maybe people might get turned off. Okay, this is Buttplug, the name of it, right? And also what your core kind of focus is, if I understand correctly. But there is another segment to this, which is more, like you said, platonic and really non-sexual, patting the head. I would have never even thought about. And you also mentioned earlier in the show, which I thought about and then I kind of lost my thought on, which is the hugging, right? So Is there anything else you think that's actually in this category that you guys are supporting and that could be useful for other people too? Like you said, I think that is that integration with metaverse or these kind of like second life kind of experiences, the VR kind of stuff. You can have these kind of things and use Buttplug, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is all we do is obviously the name of the library is somewhat provocative. So I did kind of load that on up. But honestly, that was really for my own entertainment more than anything. I just wanted to hear, I was like, okay, well, if this library takes off, I'm going to be able to paste the word butt plug across all sorts of media. And 5 years later, I've been able to, and it's been a wonderful goal to have.
So are you just trying to troll the general public with the name? Is that why you picked this name? It seems like
yeah. I have a YouTube video on why I chose this. The whole idea behind Buttplug is like I did want to have a library that controlled sex toys, but I wanted to be interest neutral, gender neutral, and everything else. So everyone, like, we can at least assume most everyone has a butt. So that was like the one toy that I could think of where it was like, okay, well, I can name it after this, and it's still neutral. And also there's Shock Jock morning DJ video from years ago where they call up a car place and start yelling butt plug in the phone, and the car place thinks it's spark plug, and it's a whole thing. So it's kind of referencing that too. But otherwise, yeah, it was like, once again, being publicly ribald, keeping it neutral, and kind of being silly for that reference. But just because the library is called that, we could do general haptics. Like, this could be used for anything you want to hook it up to. And the library is open for that. It's just, I chose this context because if I ever get sick of the technical side of this, I can always work infinitely on the social side because there's so much social work to do around this library in terms of ethics, in terms of consent, in terms of everything else that we have to think about while also applying code to this, that it just stays infinitely interesting. And there's so many different types of people that are interested in this too, that it's not aiming for one community. That, yeah, I can go in so many directions. That's why I haven't put it down in this long. But yeah, so if people want to like hook up their own haptics to it that are not specifically sexual, that's totally doable. Like, there's effective haptics is a large field that goes beyond intimate haptics. Like you mentioned with hug jackets, of which there have been many over the years. There's a researcher, Dave Parisi, who does a lot of really great work on that information. There's a really popular sort of design, like sophomore design project that a lot of people in HCI do, where they like make a little bracelet that when you press a button on it and someone else is wearing the bracelet, vibrates, so you can think about that person. It's been done to death, but it's still popular and people still kind of want that sort of thing. So, and that could be doable with the library if you wanted. So yeah, just because that context is there doesn't mean it has to be used that way. All we're doing is providing a tiny bit of context to some otherwise contextless hardware.
Yeah, definitely. I was curious if there's any companies, or maybe you can talk about any kind of industries that are actually using Buttplug that you know of to do this kind of more affectionate type stuff.
Not at the moment. Everything is fairly more on the intimate side right now. We have companies using the library, but they're producing things like adult games or movie players that do hardware sync or something like that. If there hasn't been anything more general than that, but it's there if people want to use it. I mean, in the end, this library is I just call it a user space human interface device layer. Like, normally the thing that, like, your operating system handles how you access like your keyboard and your mouse and things like that. So that's all done by the operating system. But these devices, which are still human interface devices, are just not popular enough to be at the operating system level. So we bring it up into user space, but we still kind of act like that generic hardware abstraction layer in between the application and the operating system.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything else I want to ask about at this moment, but I learned a lot. I didn't even know about the hugging stuff, right? So I looked up, and H&M is kind of a place where maybe I don't shop there. I think it's more for women, if I remember correctly. I get confused between H&M and there's another Japanese store that does stuff, and I never knew that they made a jacket like this. I never knew there even was anything like that, or
Yeah, so
had
there's
anything
also
else.
there's a place called Cute Circuit that puts out a shirt called the Hug Shirt. It's not cheap. It's 550 pounds sterling, but it's the same idea where you can, like, it'll kind of compress you and actually comes with like a mobile app and stuff. In terms of thermoreception, there's a really interesting thing called the Ember Wave bracelet. So it's basically a Peltier cooler that goes on your wrist and it allows you to simulate changes in personal temperature. So say you're feeling overly warm in a room, but you can't you've already changed the AC or something, you're still feeling overly warm. You can wear this bracelet, and due to sort of how the parasympathetic system works, it will actually make you feel like your whole body is getting. And that's a type of thermoreceptive haptics. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff around about this. There's also the Freeble, which is no longer a product, I believe, but that was a hand holding device so that you could hold hands with someone remotely. It was usually shown for families that were remote or something like that. So effective haptics in general it's a large field. There's not a lot of standout products in it. You'll find a lot of kind of fly-by-night stuff that pops up for a year or two and then kind of dies, but it's people kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. The thing is, the intimate stuff I worked with has been stuck for years. But once again, lessons can be taken from this more intimate stuff to make it less intimate too. That's one of the things that I end up talking about a lot when I'm talking about interfaces in design talks and stuff about Buttplug, where it's how do you build an interface to a computer that someone feels comfortable having sex with when they're scared to install their printer drivers?
Yeah.
We do not have a good track record with UI, UX on computers in general, pretty much ever. So if we can finally get to a point where people feel so comfortable enough to have these intimate experiences and that they work reliably and the numbers in terms of ownership of these products and stuff go up, what lessons can we take from that and apply to the rest of computing?
Yeah, I kind of want to go back for a quick second to talk about
Sure.
the Ember Wave, right?
Mhm.
So I just did some checking from Ember Labs. What I thought was very interesting is they actually say it's been clinically proven to treat the symptoms of menopause. So it's actually medically, well, if I understand correctly, it seems like there's a medical actually a reason for this stuff, which is very interesting. I never knew about this kind of thing.
Yeah, we're still human bodies are a shitty pile of hacks. And so we're still figuring out exactly what all we can do to them to basically make ourselves comfortable until we die. And it's really interesting the farther we get into the capabilities of tracing the sympathetic and parasympathetic system to doing fMRIs with all sorts of wild stuff stuck to us while we're in a tube with a 3 Tesla magnet looking at us. And also just what illusions make us feel. When you work in haptics in general, especially for interfaces, one of the major things we work with is this idea of haptic illusion. Because trying to recreate one-to-one haptics in a situation is really, really, really hard. There's all sorts of mechanical and physical requirements that have to be thought of to recreate, once again, the temperature, the surface pressure, the friction, the texture, all of these. If you just sit there and put your finger on a table and kind of move it around and think about okay, what all am I feeling right now? How am I taking this sensation that's happening to my finger and turning that into touch? And what does it mean? You can sit there and think about it for a really long time and you still won't come up with everything. So what we have to do in haptics is take one portion of that and concentrate on it really hard and go, okay, how can we fool that to make it extend to a larger basis, which is things like what we can do with this sort of thermohaptic stuff and with a lot of other haptics too. This idea of once again, if you're playing a video game and a large monster stomps down and your controller vibrates, that's sort of the illusion that it's okay, well, part of the world is vibrating and I need to know about it, but it's not that monster actually stomped down. So what we have to think about it a lot is how do we fool the senses, and how do we fool the senses for long enough that people don't care that we fool them?
Yeah, this is really interesting. You kind of brought in my mind really today with okay, this library, this topic area is not as taboo as I think, right? There's some medical uses. Of course, there's entertainment, self-feeling good kind of uses. And then there's medical uses if we can take this Ember Labs or product and what they state that there could be a medical use for it.
Yeah, there's been a push to change what we call sex technology to more of a health and wellness type branding, because it needs to be classified more under a general holistic wellness regimen than it does just, well, you have all your wellness and then you can go have sex, and that has nothing to do with the rest of your body and anything else. Because no, it has a lot to do with your body. And certainly, I mean, there's going to be people like me out there that are very much of the sort of like John Waters philosophy of, yeah, but I want to make it dirty too. Which is, I mean, that's part of where the Buttplug name and stuff comes from. It's kind of fun there. But yes, there is a lot of different directions this can go, a lot of different ways this can be done. And even in terms of sex and wellness, there's a company, Lioness, that puts out a censored-enabled vibrator that can be used for self-tracking and self-learning about sexual health. So yeah, all sorts of stuff and all sorts of directions that this can go, both sort of, yeah, once again, for entertainment as well, for wellness or for social connection or whatever.
Yeah, I think this is information overload for me. You really opened my mind. And like I
yeah,
said,
good luck
not just
editing
about
this down.
well, that's why I have editors, right? So, and we have to make notes with timestamps. So I'm curious to see how, because they usually help me to do that. So I'm curious about how they're going to be able to timestamp and describe the section. But I think the end is easier than the beginning. But in any case, yeah, again, thank you for your time. I think maybe we could start to kind of wrap up. And I think that we can kind of talk about, I'm aware that you are not necessarily looking for contributors, but maybe there's other ways that people can help, like contributing to code at least. Like, is there places that people can actually help? I think you have a big section about tutorials, right? So maybe if they could say, if they create a tutorial how to use your app or what you can do with it, maybe put it out there and kind of link it back to your stuff. Maybe that's one way that they can kind of help push the project forward and let people know what it is, and that, could be used for whatever kind of purpose you want.
Absolutely, absolutely. It would be really what we want is people building on top of the library, or if they have a perspective on how to use the library, that's great. The part that is a little bit more difficult on contributions is the core library itself, the thing that actually talks to hardware. But working on top of it, possibly even working on language bindings too, if there's a language that we don't work with or something like that. We're also working really hard to try to get on Android right now. That's certainly something. Also, part of the Buttplug library, there's a library that goes along with it called BTLE Plug. That is a cross-platform Bluetooth LE host library I maintain along with a couple of other people. That one actually has community contributions to it because I don't want to compile for blues. So we've got a lot of people working on a lot of different platforms there. That's a great place to look, especially if you're interested in Bluetooth interaction through Rust. But certainly, yeah, building your own apps for the libraries, building language bindings for the libraries. We also have a Patreon and a GitHub sponsors because it turns out buying all these toys gets really expensive. So that's another thing where I try to kind of pick up just so because we have to own all the toys we support basically just to make sure that they work. And that's why I have this gigantic rack unit of toys that otherwise never really get touched. But yeah, so money certainly helps there. And that's why we've got the Patreon and the GitHub and everything else. Yeah, and more than anything, just feedback. Even if people have ideas of like, well, have you tried this with the library? Or can it do this? Like, feel free to reach out. We have a Twitter account. We have a Discord. We have discussions open on our GitHubs. And there's also a YouTube channel. I run a YouTube channel called Buttplug with Q. Available at youtube.buttplug.io that has tons of videos now. I've had it going for about 5 years now. And I do everything from talking about video game interaction to different projects that people have made with the library to how certain hardware works with the library, things like that. So there's all sorts of content there. So yeah, all sorts of ways to at least interact and talk to us and possibly contribute ways other than that core code.
Perfect. I think you really made it quite clear. And maybe I'll be checking this out. Depends on if I'm alone or not, maybe. Because not that I'm afraid of people find out my fetishes, but I just don't know what's in the video or what's in the documentation
certainly
may get weird looks from people, right? So as we talked before, you've also had some interesting feedback from people around you in your life, and you have to kind of, okay, maybe I can't talk about it with these people, but they know
certainly,
what I do.
Yeah, it's all about keeping a context that's based on the situation. I mean, even in the show today, too, where it's not like talking about exactly how this stuff is used and showing pictures and everything else. No, it's like this can be talked about at sort of a higher level, and then letting people go as deep as they want with it is great. But really, like, all I want to do is kind of show what's going on, and then people can kind of take it where they want to go.
I like that. It's like, okay, you do whatever you want to do. Just, tell me the model, tell me the OS, and then I'll take it from there. Okay.
Yeah. It's because there's no expectation. Like, it tends to warn people off when you have an expectation of sharing or something like that. Like, oh, you really need to tell us, or we're asking inappropriately. No, it's nice if you tell us you are using the library, and we're glad to take in stories and certainly bug reports and anything else. But otherwise, yeah, go have fun.
It seems like, is that the mantra or the slogan is just have fun?
Yeah. Just, we have a full mission statement, but it's a lot more words than that. But basically, like, go have fun and don't hurt anyone, yourself or anyone.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Again, I thank you for your time. If there's not anything else, and I think, it was great having you on. We record a lot of material and we chatted together for a long time. I want to keep going, but I also have things I need to do today, and I'm sure you have also things you need to do, or maybe kind of start to sign off for the night, right? Because late for you, early for me.
Yeah, it's almost 7 here, so gonna go have some dinner now.
All right, thank you for your time, and yeah, maybe we'll have you back later on. There's something else that's going on in the community. But
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.